The sun had barely risen over the wide golden fields of Montana when Daniel Carter tightened the reins of his horse and gazed across the valley. The land was vast, beautiful and lonely, a perfect reflection of his heart. He had everything a man could want: thousands of acres of ranch land, dozens of horses, a grand white ranch house that stood proud against the horizon, and 2 little sons who carried his name. Yet wealth could not fill the echoing silence that haunted the halls of his home every night. His wife, Emily, had passed away 2 years ago in a storm that took not only her life, but Daniel's peace with it. Since that night, laughter had vanished from the ranch. The boys, Ethan, age 8, and Jacob, 6, rarely smiled anymore. They sat quietly at the breakfast table, eating their cereal in silence while their father stared out the window, lost in memories of what used to be. The maids came and went, hired nannies quit after weeks, unable to handle the coldness of a house that once felt like a home. Daniel's heart had turned to stone, but deep inside, he knew his boys needed something he couldn't give: a mother's touch. In town, far from Daniel's sprawling ranch, a young woman named Grace Turner was struggling to hold her life together. She had once been a bright, hopeful schoolteacher with dreams of inspiring children. But when her small-town school closed and the pandemic of hard times struck the area, she lost her job, her apartment, and her savings in a single cruel season. With nowhere to go and no family to call, she found herself living in her car, parked behind the churchyard, reading books under the streetlight to escape her reality. Still, she never lost her spirit. She volunteered at the local soup kitchen, helped the elderly, and even tutored children for free when she could. Her gentle heart made her beloved by everyone. But love didn't pay rent. One cold morning after a heavy rain, Grace sat outside a small cafe, sipping free coffee when she overheard 2 ranch hands talking about their boss, the rich, widowed cowboy who couldn't keep a nanny longer than a month. "He's got more money than sense," one of them laughed. "What he needs is a woman who ain't scared of hard work or 2 little boys." Grace smiled faintly, unaware that those simple words would soon change her life. Later that day, she saw a flyer pinned to the grocery store board. "Help wanted. Live-in tutor needed for 2 young boys. Must love children. Willing to live on ranch. Good pay. Meals included." Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated. Could she really live in a stranger's home? But then she looked at her reflection in the glass window. Tired eyes, rumpled clothes, the look of someone who had lost everything except hope. She took a deep breath, tore the flyer down, and decided to go. The drive to Carter Ranch was long and winding, through fields of wildflowers and fences that stretched for miles. When she arrived, the mansion-like ranch house took her breath away. It wasn't just a home, it was a kingdom of its own. The front porch stretched wide, and the smell of fresh hay and sunlight filled the air. She nervously knocked on the heavy oak door, clutching her old handbag like a shield. Daniel himself opened it. He was taller than she expected, with rugged hands and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her. His voice was deep, steady. "You must be Grace Turner," he said, looking at the paper she'd filled out. "You came all this way for a tutoring job?" Grace nodded, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, sir. I love children. I can cook, clean, and teach. I just need a chance." Daniel studied her. She was thin, tired, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes that reminded him of Emily. For a moment, something in him softened. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay for a week. If my boys take to you, we'll talk about something more permanent." Inside, Grace met Ethan and Jacob, 2 shy, wide-eyed boys who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The younger one clung to his brother's hand, whispering, "Is she gonna stay?" Grace smiled warmly and crouched down to their level. "Only if you want me to." The boys said nothing. But that night, she read them a story about stars and wishes, and for the first time in months, the ranch heard laughter again, small and fragile, but real. From his office window, Daniel heard it too. He paused, pen in hand, listening to the faint giggles drifting down the hall. It stirred something deep in his chest, something he'd buried with Emily. When he passed by their room later, he saw Grace sitting beside the bed, softly tucking the boys under the blankets. Her face glowed in the lamplight, gentle and patient. For a brief, fleeting second, Daniel imagined what it would be like if she stayed forever. He quickly shook off the thought, closing his heart once more. But destiny, as always, had its own plans. That night, as the wind swept over the fields, Daniel stood on the porch looking at the stars. Grace stepped out quietly, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. He looked at her, a stranger, yet somehow familiar. "Haven't slept well in years," he admitted. They stood there in silence, 2 lonely souls sharing the same moonlight. The night was calm, but in their hearts, something new had begun, something neither of them dared name. The ranch that had once been silent was slowly coming back to life, 1 heartbeat at a time. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was only the beginning of a story that would test their courage, their faith, and their hearts. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of Carter Ranch, spilling golden warmth over the polished floors and waking the house with gentle brightness. It had been 3 weeks since Grace Turner arrived, and already the walls that once echoed with silence were filled with the sounds of life again. The boys, Ethan and Jacob, followed her everywhere, helping her feed the chickens, collecting wildflowers for her lesson plans, even waiting outside her small guest room each morning with sleepy smiles and messy hair. Grace had brought something no money could buy: peace. Daniel noticed it more each day, though he rarely spoke of it. He would come home from the fields exhausted from work, only to find Grace and the boys sitting by the fire reading aloud, her voice calm and kind, the boys' laughter filling the room. Slowly, a warmth began to return to his home and to his heart. But small towns have long tongues, and gossip travels faster than the wind. By the time the 3rd week rolled around, folks in town were whispering about the widowed rancher and the poor teacher who had come to live under his roof. At the diner, women leaned over their coffee cups and whispered, "She's after his money." At the feed store, old men shook their heads and said, "He's too proud to admit he's lonely." Daniel heard the talk but ignored it. Grace, however, heard it too, and it cut deep. She had come only to work, to find shelter, not to become a scandal. Late one evening, after the boys had gone to bed, she decided to pack her things and leave quietly before sunrise. But as she folded her clothes into a small worn suitcase, she heard a soft knock. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there, hat in hand, his eyes tired but sincere. "You're leaving," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Grace lowered her gaze. "The town's talking," she whispered. "I can't bring trouble to your name. You've done enough for me." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel stepped closer. "You think I care what they say?" he asked, voice low. "Grace, this house was a tomb before you came. My boys smile again because of you. You've brought light back here, and I can't let that walk away." Grace's eyes shimmered with emotion, but she shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Mr. Carter, I'm just a teacher trying to find her way." He looked at her for a long moment, then said something she never expected. "Maybe I do owe you something. Maybe I owe you more than I can say." He took a slow breath, his voice trembling slightly, a rare thing for the proud cowboy. "Grace Turner," he said, "I need a mother for my sons, and you need shelter. But more than that, I think we both need a second chance. So I'm asking you plain and honest, will you stay here as my wife?" The world seemed to stop. Grace's lips parted in disbelief. "What?" she whispered. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes unwavering. "I'm not asking for romance or promises you can't make. I'm asking for partnership, for a home, for stability for my boys. You've already proven you have the heart for this place. All I'm asking is that you stay, not as a worker, but as part of this family." Tears filled Grace's eyes. The offer wasn't a dream, it was a lifeline, and yet she hesitated. "Daniel, you don't even know me," she said softly. "You don't know my past, my mistakes." He cut her off gently. "I don't need to know your past. I see who you are now. That's enough for me." His sincerity left her speechless. The weight of the moment pressed against her heart. She had nothing, no family, no home, and yet this man was offering her both. Still, she couldn't say yes out of gratitude or desperation. She needed time to understand her own heart. "Please," she whispered, "give me until morning." That night, Grace didn't sleep. She walked through the ranch house, the moonlight bathing everything in silver. She stopped by the boys' room. They were asleep, their faces peaceful, clutching the storybook she had read them. She smiled through tears. Then she stepped out onto the porch where the wind whispered through the grass, and the stars shimmered like promises waiting to be kept. Her heart said yes, but her fear said no. Could she really step into a marriage built on need and not love? Could she risk her heart again after losing so much? When dawn came, The house was quiet except for the smell of fresh coffee. Daniel was already in the kitchen, wearing his old flannel shirt. Looking out the window at the rising sun, Grace entered softly. He turned, his expression unreadable. "Well?" he asked simply. Grace took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I'll stay," she said finally. "But not for the money, not out of pity. I'll stay because those boys need me, and maybe because I need this place too." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then slowly, a rare smile curved his lips. The first genuine smile she'd seen on his face since the day she arrived. "Then it settled," he said. He took off his hat, bowed his head slightly and whispered, "Thank you, Grace." The news spread through town like wildfire. Daniel Carter's getting married. People gasped. Some laughed, others frowned, and a few even came to the ranch to congratulate him, though their smiles carried judgment. Grace endured it all quietly, focusing on the boys and her new role. But not everyone was happy about the union. Among the murmurs in town was a voice filled with resentment. Clara Weston, Daniel's late wife's cousin, who had always believed she should have inherited the ranch's wealth. "That poor teacher won't last a month," Clara sneered. "She doesn't belong in that world." Grace didn't know it yet, but darker trials were waiting for her. Challenges that would test not just her courage, but the very foundation of her marriage. Still, as she stood on the ranch porch that evening, watching the boys chase fireflies, Daniel beside her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. The cowboy's heart had begun to heal, and the poor teacher had found a home. But every story of love has its storm, and theirs was only just beginning to form over the horizon. The summer sun hung low over the Carter ranch, painting the golden fields in shades of honey and fire. It had been a month since Grace agreed to Daniel's proposal, and life had settled into a new rhythm. The wedding was small and quiet, just the boys, the preacher, and the wide-open sky as their witness. Grace wore a simple white dress that fluttered in the wind, and Daniel, in his brown Stetson and polished boots, looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that neither dared name. When he said "I do," his voice cracked, not from nerves, but from a feeling he hadn't known in years: hope. For Ethan and Jacob, it was as though sunshine had come home to stay. They called her Miss Grace at first, but slowly the words Mom slipped out, timid and trembling, until one day it stayed, natural and warm. Grace's eyes had filled with tears that day, and Daniel had turned away, hiding his own. Under her care, the ranch began to change. Curtains opened again, laughter filled the kitchen, and the horses seemed livelier, as though they too sensed the shift in the air. Daniel found himself smiling more, eating proper meals, even humming old songs while mending fences. Grace brought color back into a life that had gone gray. Yet deep down she still carried a quiet worry. The whispers from town, the sideways glances when she went to the market, the rumors that she was nothing more than a poor woman who married for comfort. But Daniel's steady presence gave her courage. He defended her when needed and ignored the noise when he could. But as with every calm season, a storm was coming, and it wouldn't just be the kind that darkened the skies. It started one afternoon when a letter arrived. Daniel sat at his desk, reading the words slowly, his expression darkening. Grace walked in, wiping her hands on a towel. "Bad news?" she asked softly. Daniel sighed, folding the paper. "It's from the bank," he said. "They're investigating land rights again. Old claims from the Weston family." Grace froze. "Clara Weston?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded grimly. "She's trying to take me to court. Says part of this land was never transferred properly after Emily passed." Grace's heart sank. Clara Weston, Emily's cousin, had always hovered like a vulture, bitter that Daniel inherited the ranch instead of her. Clara owned several small properties nearby, but her greed was endless. And now she'd found a way to strike, not just at Daniel's land, but at his peace. Over the next week, the ranch buzzed with tension. Lawyers came and went, paperwork piled up, and Daniel's temper flared more often. The boys felt it too. Their laughter faded, replaced by uneasy silence. Grace tried to comfort them, reading stories and baking pies, but she could feel the storm brewing, inside Daniel and outside their walls. One night, the sky finally broke open. Thunder rolled across the valley as rain slammed against the windows. Daniel paced the floor, frustration boiling over. "She's doing this to ruin me," he growled. "She can't stand seeing me happy." Grace placed a gentle hand on his arm. You can't fight hate with hate, Daniel, she said softly. You'll only let her win. But he pulled away, his voice rising. You don't understand. This land is all I have. It's my family's blood, my father's sweat. Without it, what am I? Grace flinched, but her voice stayed calm. You're a father, Daniel. A good one. That's what matters. He turned toward her, eyes burning with pain and pride. You don't know what it's like to lose everything. She stepped closer, rain thundering outside. Yes, she whispered, I do. I lost my home, my career, my dignity. But I didn't lose my faith, and neither should you. For a long moment, he just stared at her. The storm outside mirrored the one inside him, wild, relentless, desperate. Then suddenly lightning flashed and a loud crack shook the air. One of the barns had been struck. The horses! Daniel shouted, grabbing his coat and rushing into the rain. Grace followed without hesitation, pulling her shawl tight. The wind howled, rain soaking them to the bone as they ran across the field. Flames licked at the barn's roof, glowing orange against the night. Daniel grabbed a bucket, shouting orders, and Grace helped without fear, ushering the frightened horses out into the storm. In that chaos, something unspoken was forged between them, not just duty or gratitude, but partnership. Grace's hair clung to her face, her eyes fierce as she pulled open the last stall gate. A frightened mare reared, nearly knocking her down, but Daniel caught her just in time, pulling her into his arms. You could have been killed, he shouted over the roar of rain. So could you, she fired back. For a second, they just stared at each other, drenched, shaking, breathless. And then the distance between them vanished. His lips met hers, fierce and raw, a kiss born not of romance but survival, of everything they'd been holding back. When the fire was finally out, the barn a smoking ruin but the horses safe, they stood side by side in the muddy field. Daniel turned to her, rain still dripping from his hat. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for the things I said, for letting anger talk for me. Grace smiled through exhaustion. You don't have to apologize for being human. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his eyes changed. Grace, he said softly, I thought I married you because my boys needed a mother, but now I know I needed you too. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the air crisp and clean. As the first rays of sunlight spread across the land, the ranch stood scarred but unbroken. The fire had taken a barn, but it had given them something far greater. Trust. From that day, Daniel began to share more of himself. He talked about Emily, about the guilt he carried, about the nights he'd sat awake wondering if he could ever feel again. Grace listened, not as a wife by contract, but as a partner by choice. In town, Clara Weston seethed when she heard how they'd survived the storm. Her plan to break the Carter family had failed, and she vowed to try again. But for now, Daniel and Grace had weathered their first true test and come out stronger, side by side, hearts unguarded. As the sun rose over the ranch, Grace stood on the porch watching the boys chase butterflies in the wet grass. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The storm's over, he murmured. She leaned against him, smiling softly. Maybe, she said, but sometimes storms are what teach us where home truly is. And in that quiet morning light, both of them knew love had found its way even through the rain. The autumn wind swept across Carter Ranch, whispering through the tall yellow grass as the season of harvest began. The days grew cooler, the nights crisper, and the land shimmered with shades of amber and rust. Life on the ranch had slowly returned to peace after the storm. The barn had been rebuilt, the boys were thriving, and Daniel and Grace had settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost like forever. Mornings were filled with laughter, evenings with the scent of baking bread and soft country music, playing from the old radio. Grace's presence had turned the ranch into a true home, not just a place of work, but of warmth. Daniel had started to smile more, to trust again. And for the first time since Emily's death, he dared to believe in happiness. But peace, like glass, is fragile, and sometimes it only takes a single stone from the past to shatter it. It began one Friday afternoon when a black car drove up the long dirt road toward the ranch. Grace was teaching the boys their lessons at the kitchen table when the sound of tires crunching gravel made her heart skip. She stepped to the window, frowning, as a woman in a red coat and dark sunglasses stepped out of the car. Even before the woman spoke, Grace knew who it was. Clara Weston. Her voice was smooth and sharp as silk when she spoke. "Well, well," she said, her lips curling into a smirk. The teacher turned white. "You've made yourself quite comfortable, haven't you?" Grace's spine stiffened. "Clara, if you're here about the lawsuit—" Clara cut her off with a wave of her gloved hand. "Oh, don't worry, darling. I'm not here about the land, not this time. I'm here about you." Before Grace could respond, Daniel entered, his expression instantly hardening. "Clara, you're not welcome here," he said firmly. Clara smiled sweetly. "Oh, cousin, always so rude. I just thought your wife should—" "No, you aren't the only one with secrets." She pulled a folded paper from her purse and set it on the kitchen table. "You married a woman without knowing who she really is. Go ahead, Grace. Tell him, or should I?" Grace's hands trembled. "Don't, Clara," she whispered, her face pale. Daniel's brow furrowed. "What is this about?" Clara stepped closer, relishing every word. "Your perfect little school teacher isn't who she says she is. 2 years ago, she was engaged to a banker named William Reed, who was arrested for fraud. She lost her job because she was accused of helping him hide the money. She wasn't convicted, but the scandal ruined her name. That's why she ran. That's why she was living in her car when you found her." The room fell silent. The boys looked confused, Daniel frozen, Grace trembling. Clara smiled with cruel satisfaction. "You see, Daniel, she didn't come here for shelter. She came here to start over, to hide her past. She fooled you all. With that—" Clara turned and swept out of the house, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. For a long moment, no one spoke. Grace tried to breathe, tried to explain, but words caught in her throat. Daniel finally turned to her, eyes dark and unreadable. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Grace nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, Daniel, but not the way she said it. I didn't do anything wrong. William, he used me. I didn't know what he was doing until it was too late. When the police came, they questioned me for days, but they found nothing because I was innocent. Still, the school board fired me. No one believed me. I left to escape the shame." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You should have told me," he said, his voice tight. "I had a right to know." Grace's heart ached. "I was going to, but every time I tried. You looked at me with such trust, such kindness. I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want to lose this family." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his face torn between love and betrayal. "I need time to think," he said, and walked out into the fading light. That night, the house fell silent again. Just like the day Grace first arrived, the boys cried quietly in their room, not understanding why their parents weren't speaking. Grace sat alone by the fireplace, staring at the flames, remembering the storm, the laughter, the love they'd built. It all felt like it was slipping away, piece by piece. Days passed. Daniel worked from dawn till dusk, barely speaking to her. The boys grew restless and sad, asking if Mom was leaving. Grace tried to stay strong, keeping the house running, making meals, teaching lessons, but her heart felt heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Every night she prayed that Daniel would come back inside, not as a stranger, but as the man who had once stood beside her in the rain and promised she belonged. One evening, a letter arrived, and this time addressed to Grace. It was from the state office. Hands shaking, she opened it, and her breath caught. It was a notice. William Reed had confessed everything. In his written statement before sentencing, he had cleared Grace's name entirely, admitting she had been unaware of his crimes. Tears filled her eyes. Justice had come at last, though too late to spare her the pain. She found Daniel outside near the barn, fixing the gate as the sun set behind him. "Daniel," she said softly, holding the letter. "You need to see this." He took it, read it slowly.